Have you ever looked into a child's eyes and felt as if you were gazing into a soul that had walked through centuries? Have you ever heard someone describe a dream with details so vivid it didn't feel imagined, but remembered from someone else's life, from another existence, a past life all around the world? There are hundreds, even thousands of stories about reincarnation, about children who had just learned to speak, yet could already recount the life of someone who had died. Many call it superstition. Others chuckle and dismiss it as fantasy. But then there are stories that make people stop and think. The story you're about to hear took place in a small village nestled in the Golan Heights, a region where Syria and Israel meet, a land steeped in ancient mysteries, where time seems to flow more slowly, and strange tales quietly pass from one generation to the next. The central figure of the story is a little boy, only 4 years old. He was like any other child, innocent, energetic, sometimes even a bit stubborn. But on one quiet afternoon, he looked at his mother and spoke in a steady, unwavering voice. "I was murdered. I remember who did it, and my body is on the mountain." The room fell silent. His mother thought he was just speaking nonsense, like any imaginative child. But then, word by word, detail by detail, he described a place he had never been to so precisely that the entire village began to shiver. Eventually, a group of villagers followed the boy up the mountain. No one believed anything would come of it, until they dug into the dry soil and discovered a human skeleton, and a truth that had been buried for 4 years. This is not fiction, not a novel. It is a true story, documented and reported by several international news outlets. But more importantly, it's a story about justice that crosses the boundary of death, about memory as a seed that never disappears, merely hidden beneath the soil of the unconscious. And then, one day, it rises just to do one thing, to finish the unfinished past. If you believe that there are things science cannot explain, and that sometimes truth doesn't need proof, then stay with this story. The boy in the story is named Ahmad. Born into a simple farming family in a small village located in the Golan Heights, an ancient land bearing traces of civilizations from thousands of years ago, Ahmad was their only child, cherished and loved deeply by his parents. He had deep black eyes and a gaze far more contemplative than other children in the village. From the moment he learned to speak, Ahmad began to show strange signs. Not seizures or night terrors, but words that sent chills down the spines of the adults. One day, when he was just 3.5, he was playing alone in the yard when he turned to his mother and asked, "Mom, why am I here?" She smiled gently, thinking it was just a silly question. But he continued, "I don't belong here. I used to live in another village. I had a wife. A man killed me with an axe." His mother froze. She assumed he had overheard something on television or from the adults' conversations. But in this village, there was no TV, and he had never left the neighborhood. In the days that followed, he kept mentioning strange names. My old house had a stone well beside it, and an old olive tree. I remember a red dirt path that led up the hill. I walked home on that path every evening. Then, he stopped me. He said he'd help. But then, he killed me. He spoke in a calm tone, like he was recalling a distant memory but without fear. What unsettled the adults was the level of detail in his words, far beyond what any child could make up. Ahmad's parents began to document everything he said. At night, after he went to sleep, they would whisper to each other, afraid to tell anyone else. But Ahmad didn't stop. He started to draw. In his scribbled sketches, they saw a house, a small garden, a curly-haired man holding an axe, and a hole in the ground. When Ahmad turned 4, his family brought him to a neighboring village for a community meeting. There, the adults were discussing a land dispute. Suddenly, the little boy went silent, then pointed at a man standing in the corner. "Mom, that's the man who killed me." His voice was gentle. His eyes didn't blink. Everyone turned to look. The man startled, but then forced a laugh and waved it off. Just a child, probably dreaming too much. But from that day on, the villagers' eyes began to change. The story spread quickly. People started talking. Some recalled that about 4 years ago, a man in the village had mysteriously disappeared. His name was Elias, in his 30s, lived alone, often worked the fields on the western slopes. Some believed he had moved away. Others suspected an accident, but his body had never been found. Now, a child who had never met Elias was recounting his life in stunning detail, not just that he named his killer. Under pressure from the community, the village chief decided the matter could no longer be ignored. He visited Imad's family and asked permission to speak with the boy. In that meeting, Imad recounted everything. My name was Elias. I lived alone. My house was over the hill. A man once helped me plow my field, but he got angry when I refused to lend him money. One afternoon, he ambushed me on my way home and struck me from behind. I fell, bleeding. He dragged me up the mountain and buried me under a dry tree. The chief couldn't sit still. On one hand, he didn't want to escalate things if it was just a child's imagination. But on the other, he couldn't ignore such a specific account. He contacted the local police. At first, they were hesitant, but due to community pressure and growing attention from the media, they agreed. So, on a windy morning, a group of adults, including the village chief, police, local reporters, and a 4-year-old boy set off toward the mountain. Imad didn't hesitate. He walked swiftly, as if he had taken that path hundreds of times before. This way. Turn left at that olive tree. Then, here. He pointed to the ground, at a spot with a small bush and cracked, dry earth. My body is here. Everyone looked at one another. No one said a word, and then they began to dig. At first, no one truly expected to find anything. The local police had only brought one shovel and a few basic tools, more as a formality than in genuine anticipation. A few onlookers chuckled nervously. Others stood in silence, their eyes filled with skeptical curiosity. Only Imad remained calm. He stood still, hands clasped together, eyes fixed on the first stroke of the shovel. Less than 30 minutes later, the village chief's shovel struck something harder than soil. He paused, bent down, and gently brushed away the dust. A gasp echoed through the group. It was a piece of white bone, not from an animal. A human bone. All eyes turned to the little boy. Imad showed no surprise. He simply said quietly, "That's me." The police immediately halted the manual digging, secured the area, and contacted the forensic team. A group of investigators was dispatched from a nearby city. Archaeological experts and forensic pathologists were called in. The story had now moved far beyond a child's dream. This was a real murder case. Over the next few hours, under strict supervision, an adult human skeleton was gradually unearthed. The skull showed a fracture on the right side exactly as Imad had described. He struck me in the head with an axe. No weapon was found at the site. But the soil around the body indicated it had been buried there for at least 3 to 4 years, matching precisely the timeline of Elias's disappearance. At this point, the victim's identity had not yet been confirmed, as there were no documents or intact belongings. But the boy continued speaking. My name was Elias. That day I wore a gray shirt, brown pants. I had a small silver bracelet on my right wrist, engraved with the letter E. When the forensic team cleaned the remaining torn fabric on the skeleton, they discovered part of a bracelet still clinging to the wrist rusted over time, and faintly carved into the surface was the letter E. The investigators could hardly believe what they were seeing. A 4-year-old child, who had never left his small village, had described the details of a body, the cause of death, the victim's name, and even his clothing with total accuracy. Immediately, the case was elevated to a full criminal investigation. The man Imad had pointed to earlier, his name was Farid, was summoned to the police station. Farid was a middle-aged carpenter who lived about 2 kilometers from the village. He had once had a dispute with Elias over farmland a few years prior, but due to lack of evidence, police had never suspected him. When questioned, Farid remained calm. I don't know that child. He's just making things up. Elias was a difficult man, but I didn't harm him. However, Imad didn't stop at just identifying him. He went on to tell the police, after he killed me, he hid the axe in the sheep pen. Behind a brick wall, he rebuilt the wall to cover it. At first, even the officers found it hard to believe. But since everything Imad had said so far had been accurate, they decided to investigate. The next day, they went to Farid's home. With a search warrant in hand, they scoured the sheep pen, and exactly as the boy described behind the old brick wall, After removing the bricks one by one, they found a small hollow. Inside it was a bundle wrapped in worn fabric, containing a rusty object. An old axe. The blade was heavily oxidized, but on the metal surface, there were dark, dried stains suspected to be long-dried blood. The axe was taken for testing. DNA analysis confirmed that the blood on the blade matched tissue samples from the skeleton found on the mountain. At this point, Farid could no longer deny the truth. Under the weight of the evidence and the boy's detailed account, he broke down after a few hours of interrogation. Farid confessed everything. 4 years ago, during a heated argument with Elias over unpaid land rent, he had lost control in a fit of rage. Farid grabbed an axe from the corner of the house and struck Elias in the head. Afterward, he dragged the body up the mountain under the cover of night, hastily buried it, and returned home pretending as if nothing had happened. The entire village was shaken. People were stunned, horrified. They couldn't comprehend. How could a child remember all of this? As for Farid, throughout the investigation, he avoided making eye contact with Imad. When asked how he felt about the boy remembering a past life, he murmured, "It's something I'll never understand. I buried him. I thought no one would ever find out." After the investigation concluded, Farid was brought to trial. At court, Imad's testimony could not be used as official evidence, since the law does not accept reincarnation memories as valid proof. But all the physical evidence, the skeleton, the bracelet, and the axe matched the boy's account. The trial ended with a 20-year prison sentence for murder and concealment of a body. But to the villagers, the one who truly brought this case to light was not the law. It was a 4-year-old child, a soul that had not yet found peace, a memory that returned only to close its own unfinished chapter. When the axe was found and Farid began to confess each part of the truth, the entire community was swept up in a strange blend of relief and disbelief. Relief because the mystery of the past 4 years had finally been solved. Disbelief because it was a 4-year-old child who had brought the truth to light, a case long thought to be lost to time. But the strangest part was still to come. Even after Farid's confession, Imad did not remain silent. He expressed a desire to meet the man, not to seek revenge, not to demand justice, but simply to look him in the eye, to confirm something for himself. One day before the trial, the police allowed Imad and his mother to visit the detention center under strict supervision. Farid was handcuffed, sitting quietly at a table. His face looked noticeably gaunt from the days in custody, and his eyes no longer held any defiance. Imad entered the room calm, unafraid, just a small child, but with eyes as deep as a black sea. He stared directly at Farid, and for a long, quiet moment, time seemed to stop. No one said a word. The room was so silent, you could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall. Then Imad spoke. "Why did you kill me?" The question was simple, direct, so blunt it made the air go still. Farid lowered his head, his lips trembling. I didn't mean to. I was just angry. I lost control." Imad didn't react. He stepped one pace closer and said, "You didn't just kill me. You took away my voice. You took away the chance to say goodbye to my mother, to those I loved. But now, I've come back, and I want you to know I don't hate you anymore." That made Farid look up, his eyes filled with tears. Not from fear, but from something deeper, a confrontation that could no longer be avoided. The forgiveness of a small soul that had never been allowed to rest. Imad turned to his mother and took her hand. He said softly, as if completing something important, "Now I can rest in peace." That moment was captured on the security camera by one of the officers. The footage was never released to the public, but those present later recounted. It was one of the most surreal and moving scenes they had ever witnessed. After that encounter, Farid completely changed. In court, he refused to hire a defense lawyer, made no attempt to reduce his sentence. He bowed his head and accepted his fate. In his final words before being taken away, he said, "I made the greatest mistake of my life, and the only person who had the right to hate me was the first to forgive me." The case was officially closed. But for Imad's family, it wasn't just an investigation. It was a journey to close a wound from a life that had never been completed. After the trial, international journalists, psychologists, theologians, and even spiritual scientists began visiting the small village. They wanted to meet the boy named Imad. They wanted to understand what had happened. How could a child remember the memories of someone who had died? How could a soul return with such a clear purpose? A research group from Germany conducted in-depth psychological assessments. They were surprised to find that Imad showed no signs of hallucinations, schizophrenia, or memory disorders. He was fully alert. His emotional intelligence even surpassed typical levels for his age. When asked, "Do you remember anything else from your past life?" he simply shook his head. "I don't see anything anymore. Ever since I met him, all the images in my head faded like wind." The experts fell silent. Could it be that the soul of Elias had returned only to seek justice for itself, and once that purpose was fulfilled, it no longer needed to exist? A researcher from India remarked, "This is a rare case where a reincarnated soul didn't return to relive life, but simply to complete something left unfinished, and then let go." As for Imad, he gradually returned to being a normal child. He went to school, played with friends, drew pictures, learned to read. There were no more strange stories, no more nights of sleepwalking or distant, faraway gazes, as if the memory had been nothing more than a thin mist drifting across his childhood, vanishing as the sun rose. When asked whether she believed her son had once been someone else, his mother simply smiled and said, "I'm not sure. I just know that, in one moment, my son helped a soul find peace, and because of that, my own son was born again." When the trial ended and Farid began serving his sentence, it seemed that Imad's story would gradually fade. But the opposite happened. His story quickly spread beyond the borders of the small village, appearing in major newspapers, drawing the attention of researchers, scholars, and those who believed in spiritual phenomena around the world. A research team from the University of Freiburg in Germany decided to come investigate. They had studied many cases of children claiming to remember past lives. But this was the first time they faced a case with physical evidence. A body found exactly where the child pointed, a murder weapon, and a confession from the killer, all matching the child's memories with uncanny accuracy. Professor Klaus Neumann, the team leader, shared, "We weren't trying to prove reincarnation was real. Our goal was to study how a child's brain processes information. But with Imad, everything went far beyond conventional theories." Over the course of 2 weeks, the research team conducted a series of psychological, neurological, and memory tests on Imad. They showed him photos of Elias's old home, a place he had never seen with his own eyes. Yet Imad recognized every small detail. "That's the window I used to sit by each morning. That's the wooden chair I built myself. That cupboard still has the old shirt my father left behind." The researchers were stunned. There was no way the boy could have known those things unless he had lived there. One of the psychologists, Maria Feld, proposed that Imad might be a receiver of unconscious information from the collective memory, similar to Carl Jung's theory of a collective unconscious. But even that hypothesis couldn't explain why only Imad, why with such precision, and why he felt he had been the person who died. While scientists were grappling with theories, several monks and religious scholars from Nepal and India declared that Imad's case was living proof of karma and reincarnation. A Tibetan Lama, Rinpoche Dorje, after hearing the story, wrote, "The soul of Elias did not return to live another life. He came back only to complete something left undone. And the miracle is, his new body was pure enough to receive the old memories in full." There was something particularly striking. Ever since Farid was convicted, Imad's memories began to fade. Each time the researchers asked, he remembered less and less. He grew vague. He no longer showed any emotion when hearing the name Elias. Then one day, his mother recounted, when someone asked him, "Do you still remember who you used to be?" Imad simply shook his head, smiled, and said, "I'm just Imad. The other things, I've forgotten." This detail sparked debate among scholars. Some argued that the memory was merely a psychological episode, gradually cleared by the brain so as not to interfere with the development of the child's current identity. Others believed, once the soul had fulfilled its mission, it withdrew from the child's mind so the child could live a new life, free from old pain. The story didn't stop there. In fact, Imad's case sparked a new wave of research at universities in the United States and across Europe. The Institute of Parapsychology in Virginia, USA, opened a formal research file on over 200 cases of children who claimed to remember previous lives. Among them, Imad's case was classified as Type 1, special, meaning it included verifiable physical evidence, matching testimony, and consistent behavior patterns. A British journalist, during a visit to the village where Imad lived, wrote, "This is a place where memory crosses the boundaries of time, where a child walks out from the dawn carrying the story of an unfinished sunset. The story reached beyond science, religion, or media. It became a symbol of something that transcends human understanding, a quiet reminder that perhaps death is not the end, and sometimes the words left unspoken in one life will find their voice in another form. Today, Imad still lives with his family in the same small village. He is now 8 years old. He does well in school, loves playing football, enjoys music, and remembers nothing about his past life. When someone asks, "Is it true you used to be someone else?" he simply laughs and says, "That's what people say. I don't remember. But if it's true, then I'm glad I helped someone. That's good enough." That answer perhaps is the most complete response a child needs to give. Imad has grown. He is no longer the quiet boy staring longingly out the window. He laughs, plays with the other children in the village, and tells jokes like a little performer. His life, on the surface, seems completely normal again. But to those who witnessed his journey, that normalcy carries a silence of its own, because everyone knows a soul once borrowed this small body to finish telling its story, to seek justice, and then quietly withdrew. The village chief recalled, "After everything ended, there was a day I saw Imad sitting alone on the back hill, looking at the old olive trees. I asked, 'What are you doing out here?' He just said, 'I'm saying goodbye to someone whose face I don't remember anymore.'" The answer left the chief standing there, quietly, for a long time. Maybe memory doesn't disappear, not really. Maybe it just flies off like a bird, leaving behind a shadow in the hearts of those who remain. Imad grew up with a gentle heart and eyes that seemed to hold a quiet fire. He no longer remembers who he once was. But in one of his first writing assignments at school, when asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Imad wrote simply, "I want to listen to things no one else can hear." Imad's story, though years have passed, remains a topic of discussion and debate. Some believe it, some don't. Some try to explain it through science. Others call it a miracle of the spirit. But more important than all of that, it makes us stop and reflect. How many things in this life have been forgotten? How many wrongs, unfinished dreams, unspoken words? Could it be they're simply waiting for a pure heart to carry them, waiting for a soul willing to return not to live again, but to complete what was left undone? For Imad, that may have been the only reason he came into this world in that lifetime. Just to say one thing, just to find one truth, and then to step aside and let a real life begin. On quiet nights, if you've ever sat alone and felt something flicker across your mind, a strange image, a familiar name you don't recognize, maybe that's not just imagination. Maybe it's a whisper from a life you once lived, or from a soul, still searching for someone who will listen. Believe this, nothing is ever truly lost in this world. Some stories just haven't been fully told, and sometimes a child, a glance, a dream is the way the universe chooses to complete a story left unfinished. You don't have to believe in reincarnation. You don't have to explain this story with science. You may dismiss it as coincidence, or call it myth. But one thing is undeniable. A 4-year-old child stepped into this wide world, carrying a message from the past. Not to be famous, not to be believed, but simply to return the truth to a soul that had once been silenced. And after doing so, the boy went back to being just a child again, as if the whole thing had been nothing more than a passing rain shower, leaving behind wet earth and the scent of fresh grass. Imad's story reminds us, there are wounds that are never written in books, never filed in records, but still live, in the memory of the land, of the wind, and sometimes, in a child's quiet gaze. If you've ever felt that something in your life is unresolved, believe this somewhere. The truth is still trying to find its way back. And if you listen long enough and deeply enough, maybe, just maybe, you'll hear the echo of a story that has yet to be told. There are stories like this so real they feel unreal, so strange they feel familiar. And if you're still listening, then perhaps you believe they are worth telling. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to hear more stories like this. Stories about memory, about life, and about the things logic can't always touch, but the heart can understand.